"She is adequate to her position," said Alaric Vane, the Duke of Greymore, and returned to his correspondence. I had just told him that his niece Eleanor called Miss Hartwell the only person at Greymore Park who listened to what she said after she had finished speaking. Adequate. That is the word I cannot forgive him for. I have known Alaric since we were boys kicking mud at Eton, and I have never seen a man so thoroughly unmade by his own indifference as he was undone by the quiet departure of Miss Cecily Hartwell. He would not thank me for writing it. I write it because someone should have said it to his face years earlier, and I was too cowardly to oblige. Miss Hartwell had arrived at Greymore Park in the autumn of 1814, engaged to instruct the two youngest daughters of the house, Alaric's nieces, in his guardianship since his elder brother's death. She came with a single trunk, a letter of recommendation from Lady Penrose, and a quality of stillness I had not encountered before in a young woman. She did not make herself known to a room. She simply occupied it, modestly and completely, the way a well-placed lamp illuminates without drawing the eye to itself. I was visiting for the shooting, and I noticed her at once. Alaric did not appear to notice her at all. He was in one of his long cold seasons that autumn. His brother's death had shuttered something in him, and the estate's responsibilities had replaced whatever warmth he had once possessed. He conducted his household like a general governing a campaign, efficiently, without sentiment. The governess was a piece of the machinery, necessary, unremarkable, to be left undisturbed. She asked for nothing beyond what her position required. Each early morning she sat by the long library window with a book of Latin verse, not to display her learning, simply because she loved it, and returned the volume to its exact shelf before anyone else came down, as though she had never been there. The children adored her. One November afternoon I passed the schoolroom and found the door ajar. Eleanor had been weeping. It was the anniversary of her father's death, and no one else in that silent house had marked it. Miss Hartwell had set the lesson books aside, and I heard her say, "Tell me the best thing about him, not the saddest, the best." Within minutes, the girl was laughing through her tears about her father's terrible singing voice. I turned and found Alaric in the corridor behind me. He had heard all of it. He looked at that door a long moment, then walked away without a sound, as though the warmth in that room were a country he had lost the right to enter. There was an evening in December, the fire sunk low and no footman in to build it, when Miss Hartwell slipped into the library to return her volume of Virgil, and Alaric was already there, standing at the window in one of his brooding silences. They did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "Shall I send for someone to tend the fire, Your Grace?" He turned, looked at her as though surprised to find another person breathing in his house, and said, "That will not be necessary. You may go." She did not flinch. She curtsied, neat and unhurried, and went. I saw it through the open door, and I remember thinking, that woman has more dignity in one curtsy than most men carry in a lifetime. By February, she had been at Greymore 5 months. Lady Pemberton, a neighbor and the most reliably interfering woman in the county, remarked at dinner how extraordinary it was that a governess of such evident accomplishment had not been snatched up by some other family. Alaric said nothing. He was refilling his glass. But I saw Miss Hartwell's eyes rest on him for the space of one breath, waiting to see whether he would say anything. He did not. Something in her face settled then, quietly, like a door closing. She gave her notice the last week of February, 2 sentences, perfectly correct, thanking him for the position. I was with Alaric when he read it. He read it twice, said, "Very well," and wrote her a character reference. So generous I wondered whether his hand knew something his pride had forbidden the rest of him to learn. Eleanor took the news less quietly. She asked her uncle at dinner, in front of the soup and the footman, why Miss Hartwell had to go. "Positions change," he said. "You never once came to hear us recite," the girl said. "Not once in 5 months." Alaric set down his spoon, and for a moment I thought he would answer. He did not. Miss Hartwell said gently, "Eleanor," and the child subsided, and the Duke finished his dinner in silence. She left at the end of March. She had given a full month's notice and continued every lesson precisely as before. Eleanor wept at the schoolroom. Doran recited the entire Latin declension table she had been taught, as if to prove the learning would stay even when the teacher did not. She trained the new governess for a week before her trunk was carried down. When she shook my hand on the drive, she said, "Give my regards to your wife, Mr. Caldwell," and smiled, and that was all. I looked at Alaric. He was standing at the top of the entrance steps. He was watching her very still. She did not look back. She settled first in Bath, to care for an elderly aunt, a woman of some small fortune who left everything to Cecily Hartwell when she died the following spring. Then she went to Edinburgh, where she was engaged as companion and reader to a distinguished family, and had taken up the translation of a Greek text. I heard she was well. I mentioned this to Alaric in May of 1815. He said, "She will be comfortable, I imagine," and walked away. That was the last time he allowed himself that particular coldness, and even then I could see it was costing him something. By August he had stopped shooting. By autumn he was riding the south fields at dawn and coming back with mud to his stirrups, and nothing to say about where he had been. He moved the Latin texts to a more prominent shelf. He asked the housekeeper once whether Miss Hartwell had left a forwarding direction. She had not. She had left nothing at all, because she had been given nothing to leave for. That December I finally said to his face what I ought to have said a year before, that he had not lost her because he had never once reached for her, and a man cannot lose what he refused to hold. I expected anger. He only looked at the fire and said very quietly, "I know it. I have known it since November." And I understood he meant the schoolroom door, and Eleanor's laughter, and everything he had walked away from in that corridor. So I was the one who wrote to her. Alaric did not ask me to, or rather he did not ask in words. He asked in the silences he left in rooms where she had once sat, and in the way he stood at the library window on the morning of her birthday, which he should not have known, and yet somehow did, watching the drive as if something were overdue. I found her Edinburgh address through a mutual acquaintance. I wrote that I hoped she was well, that Eleanor still recited her declensions, and that the Duke of Graymore was not the man she had known at Graymore Park, that men could be very great fools, that some fools, given time and something large enough to lose, improved. She did not respond at once. She was not a woman who rushed toward anything, but she did respond. She returned to England in the spring to visit a friend in Wiltshire, and I arranged, with the bare minimum of artifice that good conscience would allow, to have Alaric at the same house party. He knew only that I had called in a 10-year debt and told him he owed me the fortnight. He walked into the morning room on the second day, and she was there reading. She looked up. She did not stand, because she was not required to. She said very calmly, "Your Grace." Alaric is not a man given to speeches, but he crossed the room in a manner that left no ambiguity, and he said to her, quietly, the things a man can only say after a year and a half of composing them in the echo of every room she no longer occupied. He said he had been wrong. That adequate was a word he would spend the rest of his days atoning for, if she would give him days to spend. She let him finish. She closed her book. Then she told him with perfect equanimity that she would require time to consider, and that he should not mistake her willingness to listen for an answer. He nodded. He accepted this. He waited. He wrote to her through the summer, brief letters asking nothing, but inquiring after her Greek translation by name, which meant he had troubled himself to learn what it was. She answered. 3 lines for his 20, Eleanor told me, but she answered. In September she came to Graymore to visit the children, and when Alaric handed her up into the carriage, her hand rested in his a moment longer than ceremony required. He understood it, that patient, humble waiting, from a man who had never waited for anything in his life, was how I knew she had won him entirely, and that the winning was the best thing that ever happened to him. They were married in the autumn, quietly, at the country church nearest to Graymore Park. His voice, which I had heard command 1,000 acres without ever rising, broke on the word cherish. Eleanor stood up very straight and did not cry until the very end. I have thought about that curtsy for years, the one in the library, when he told her she may go. She had given him everything a man of sense would have recognized. Her steadiness, her learning, her devotion to the children he loved, and he had, in his cold and distracted grief, simply failed to see her. She never asked him to see her. She simply left, with her whole self intact, and went and built a life that did not require him. And that singular, unhurried, dignified departure did what no argument, no reproach, no waiting at a window could have done. It showed him what he had been standing in the presence of all along, a woman worth any country, any title, and every year a man had left wasted in the cold.